to highlight of chapters 1 through 8, kind of supplement your own readings and some of the other things that you'll be doing. I do want to cover a couple of assignments that are in the modules this week that should be able to help at least guide you in the direction you need to go for those assignments, as well as just mentioning some of the things within the chapter that I think are important for you. So just to get started, we're starting on chapter 1, communicating at work. And some of this chapter is going to be talking about basic communication principles, why employers find communication valuable in an employee. We'll talk about different communication principles that talk about how strategic communication can be, how unavoidable it is, because a euphemism that you'll hear quite often in communication is that you cannot not communicate. And that particularly applies to nonverbal communication. But even in our digital media age now, the fact that if you don't communicate, you're communicating something. So it's important to be aware that you can't get away from it. Many times it's also irreversible. It's also a process. We'll talk about the process, just highlighting that basically in a little bit. And it's not a real panacea either. You can't solve things just by communicating. Sometimes there are other things that go into it that relationships, culture, other things that apply to the situation may not communicating doesn't do away with the problems. They will persist. And so you have to continue to work through them in different avenues and in different ways. Of course, the chapter 1 does talk about the basics of communication, how we as a communication science looks at communication. So there are multiple models of communication. There's probably a model for every slight variation of it, but you'll look at the primary elements within a model and maybe talk about some of the theories behind those a little bit. So be aware of that. It's not as mechanistic as we may illustrate in some of these models uh, because it's ongoing and it's continuous and so forth. So we have to be prepared to be able to do all that. In addition, there are specific communication channels that we'll talk about. The idea that now that we have media that assist us in our communications, we have to understand that certain channels that we communicate these things through are very specific. They have various characteristics. Verbal communication versus nonverbal communication. And don't get wrapped up in the idea that there's nonverbal uh, messages that are as predictable as verbal or as well defined as verbal. So nonverbal communication uh, isn't necessarily the ideal for illustrating and understanding what nonverbal communication is. And so we have to understand that there's slight differences in that. Or nonverbal language, I think, is the term that a lot of people mistakenly use for implying gestures and so forth have exact meanings like language. So, keep in mind, but usually their channels have characteristics like richness and speed and synchronicity. In other words, they happen at the same time on different channels, or they're asynchronous, like this class is asynchronous. You may be experiencing it at a different time than someone else. It's not like an in-person class. So those are important things to keep in mind. So understand all those different definitions and how we control those channels as well, and how we determine how we choose to communicate, either through tone or through written and verbal versus less formal things like emojis and emoticons and so forth. That's all part of it. But as I mentioned before, culture is an important part of it. So, what is the organization? Since we are talking about an organization, and organizations are anywhere from uh, informal club meetings to sports teams to hospitals and professional organizations and so forth. They all have a culture built in around them to manage how they favor their own space. What are their preferences? What are their expectations? And so we have to keep that in mind as we're understanding that. And they also set expectations for their members. But we'll also be thinking about communicating in and beyond those organizations, because there we'll look at and discuss formal communication networks, uh, how communication comes down from the upper levels of an organization to the lower levels, and how the possibility of upward communication exists as well as we communicate our needs as workers up to our bosses and so forth. Try to understand how those work. But there's also lateral communication as well, because if you look at an organizational chart, there are people operating on the same level. Obviously, position wise, they have the same responsibilities, but they have different tasks within those things. And so you have to look at the people, the purposes, and how they sometimes discourage horizontal communication, where it's easier to talk among people of our same level of responsibility and so forth, and how informal communication networks operate as well, um, where they confirm messages, expand messages, contradict official messages, and circumvent formal messaging and so forth, and as well as personal networking that we do. And we'll talk about how some personal networking operates as far as gatekeeping, um, and reciprocity among people, or the lack of that, um, as far as developing how things go. Plus, we'll look at the last part of that chapter talks about the ethical dimensions of communication. And certainly that's probably where if we were in person and had opportunities to discuss the ethics of certain communication behaviors within an organization, would certainly be an element of importance. So make sure that you consider those approaches as you're going through this chapter. In addition, we have parts of chapter 8, which deals with managing groups. And certainly any task within an organization has to do with being part of a group. You're obviously a member of a larger organization. And so even within that organization, you'll be within a department or an office or a section, um, a ward, if you will, in the medical profession. Um, and running an effective meeting may be one of your tasks eventually. As a matter of fact, Americans attend about 62 meetings per month, averaging 31 to 60 minutes per meeting. And so it's always going to be part of what we do in an organization. And so we have to understand um, how we spend that additional time, not only in the meetings, but afterwards to recover or even prepare if we're part of doing that. And if meetings are unproductive, they become financial repercussions for an organization. So whenever we have meetings, whether it's information sharing, problem solving, decision making, ritual activities. You may not think of organizations as having ritual activities, but I've worked for several in which we just wanted to step away from all those decision making things that we had to do and just socialize a little bit. And so as you go through chapter 8, make sure you pay attention to the diversity of types of meetings that are out there and the possibility that they may have in your future. Of course, virtual meetings, sort of like the ones we're having now, have grown in importance over the last, well, less than 10 years now, since COVID particularly. But the fact that the technology has advanced to the point where we can do that has made them more important, but that also leads to fatigue. And so how do we understand and manage that? Whether they're conference calls, web connections, video conferences, or online courses. And there are technologies that make that possible. Certain wikis, which have developed since the internet age, have allowed us to share information. Not necessarily, they're more asynchronous, so they're written a lot of times. Team communication platforms like Slack and so forth have also made some team communication possible and specialized in that as well. But pay attention to discussions on how to plan a meeting, finding out why they're needed and what the necessity of those meetings are the problem solution things that get discussed, and certainly how you handle a meeting or how you handle a team could be an entire course itself. We have a group communication course in our communications department as well. I think in the nursing department, they feature that as well. So look at understanding why you need to set an agenda, have a pre-meeting work that you have to do before you actually conduct it, what it means to actually conduct the meeting and set a tone for it. Certainly, we've had discussions of etiquette and netiquette in doing online courses, and that's as well as important as an in-person meeting so that we can get through there. More formal elements like preliminary procedures, Robert's Rules of Order, and so forth, and various decision-making efforts. Kind of check those out and keep those in the back of your mind as you work through your group, so that your group effectiveness can be more important. And talk about creativity and problem solving. Most people are familiar with brainstorming techniques, but there are other methods to do that, like nominal group technique, overhead questions, direct questions, reverse questions, and relay questions. Those all come into play in that process. And then then at the end of the chapter, they kind of talk about keeping discussions on track and keeping a positive tone and how to do that, and so forth. So as you go through chapter 8, there are some important things as well as information about keeping minutes and concluding the meeting. Those are all very important things to focus on as you're going through this chapter. Now, I did want to mention a few of the assignments that are, at least in this first module. In addition to the reading and the assignments that kind of correspond to reinforcing the discussions in those chapters, make sure that you go through Appendix 2, which has to do with business writing. That might talk about keeping minutes and so forth, but a lot of it is correspondence. which is the formal method of keeping communication flowing downward from on high and maybe making its way back up. We will have a couple of assignments, the first of which is due August 30th. It's called the correspondence assignment number 1, where you'll be setting up an informational meeting interview for career advice. And so between August 23rd and October 4th, you should formally request an interview with me. Now, the assignments that will be held at his or her office. That's okay. It won't be in the office. Everything will be done virtually. And so you'll contact me, and we'll set up a online Teams meeting. So if you haven't become familiar with Teams, you use the Outlook, and you can set up an appointment and designate it as a Teams meeting for a certain time. But I need you to contact me first so you can see my schedule and recommended time that's appropriate for you and I to do that virtual meeting. All right. So make sure you do that, and be sure to print, create a PDF version of your email and save that copy of the email to a local drive, so then you can submit that as part of this assignment. Because this is a correspondence assignment, so you should follow the expectations of a formal business email and make sure it's formatted properly according to the text and the principles in a formal memo. I think that page number is accurate. If not, let me know. And that'll be due August 30th. So make sure that you at least submit the email before that date, and we'll get it set up. The other assignment is correspondence assignment 4, which will be, it's not due till September 25th. So, but because of this is condensed course, you should plan on checking out this presentation topic proposal. This is actually the final correspondence assignment, so it's a formal email where you're going to discuss your proposed presentation and talk about it, and so again, like the same way you want to save that appointment or that correspondence to a PDF and submit it through the assignment itself to receive credit for that. In the meantime, next week, there will be a quiz on chapters 1 through 8 on August 30th. It'll be available from the 24th onward. You'll have 15 minutes to complete the quiz. It's closed book and so forth. And they'll cover the areas in chapter 1 and chapter 8. It'll be available on the 24th, and you have until the 30th to complete that. So it is a little bit more self-paced. Usually I tighten these things up to within one day, but you'll have that opportunity then. All right, so if you have any questions, you have my email address, powellr@thomasmore.edu, or you can send an email through Canvas as well, and I'll try to answer your questions as you see fit. All right, so good luck with chapters 1 and 8, and I'll have another video next week to talk about chapters 2 and 9. All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you later.